The moment Mark Wahlberg's jaw tightened and his smile faded, live television took a turn no one in the studio could rewind. And in that split second, what was supposed to be a routine late-night appearance became something far more revealing. Subscribe to Prime Talk, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. This wasn't a red carpet interview. It wasn't a press junket clip edited for safety. This was live television, unfolding in real time, where tone shifts are impossible to hide and reactions can't be polished after the fact. When Mark Wahlberg sat across from Jimmy Kimmel, the expectation was familiarity. These two had history, past interviews, a comfortable rhythm built over years of late-night banter. That familiarity is exactly why what happened next mattered. Mark Wahlberg has spent decades carefully shaping his public image. From a turbulent early life to becoming one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, his narrative has always been about control, discipline, and reinvention. He is known for intensity, both on screen and off. His interviews often reflect that edge, but they rarely spiral. He jokes. He deflects. He stays composed. Until this moment. Jimmy Kimmel, on the other hand, has mastered the art of appearing casual while asking pointed questions. His style is relaxed, conversational, and often disarming. Guests lower their guard because the environment feels safe. It's late night. The laughs come easy. The couch feels familiar. But live television has a way of exposing fault lines, especially when comfort turns into complacency. The show began like hundreds before it. Applause rolled through the studio as Wahlberg walked out, confident and energized. He greeted Kimmel warmly. The audience responded positively. There was nothing in the opening moments to suggest tension. This was the kind of appearance meant to reinforce a brand, promote a project, and keep things light. But live TV moments aren't always about what's said. Sometimes they're about what changes. A shift in posture, a tightening of the voice, a smile that doesn't fully land. These are the signals that something unscripted is happening, and viewers may not consciously notice them at first, but they feel them. Mark Wahlberg is not a celebrity who reacts casually to being challenged. He has spoken openly in the past about discipline, respect, and control. He approaches conversations the same way he approaches his work, with intensity and purpose. That intensity can read as passion, but under pressure, it can also read as defensiveness. And on this night, pressure arrived quietly. Jimmy Kimmel didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't ambush. The question that shifted the interview came naturally, framed as part of a broader conversation. That's what made it effective. There was no warning sign for the audience, no dramatic build-up that suggested confrontation. And that's often how the most uncomfortable live TV moments begin. Because when a celebrity is caught off guard, it's rarely by hostility. It's by timing. The stakes in moments like these go beyond a single interview. For a celebrity like Mark Wahlberg, live television appearances reinforce public perception. They shape how audiences see him not as a character, but as a person. A defensive reaction, even a subtle one, can alter that perception instantly. Once it happens live, it belongs to the audience forever. This is why the moment mattered. Not because it was explosive, but because it was revealing. Late-night television thrives on smoothness. When that smoothness cracks, even briefly, viewers notice. And when the person cracking is someone known for control, the effect is magnified. As the interview progressed, the atmosphere in the room began to shift in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The laughter softened. The pauses grew slightly longer. Wahlberg's responses became more clipped, more deliberate. Kimmel adjusted his pacing, sensing the change, but the conversation was already moving into unfamiliar territory. What makes live talk show confrontations compelling is not volume, but visibility. Everything is exposed. There is no protective layer between the guest and the audience. Every reaction becomes part of the narrative. And in this case, the narrative was no longer about promotion. It was about response. For viewers watching at home, especially those half paying attention, this was the kind of moment that snaps focus back to the screen. Something feels different. Something feels real. You may not know why yet, but you know you're watching something unscripted. Mark Wahlberg's career has survived controversy, criticism, and intense scrutiny. He has navigated difficult conversations before. But live TV doesn't test your past. It tests your present. It asks how you react when the script disappears for just a moment. Jimmy Kimmel's role in this moment is just as important. A host's responsibility on live television is to keep the show moving without ignoring what's happening in front of them. Push too hard, and the moment becomes hostile. pull back too quickly, and it feels dishonest. The balance is delicate, and on this night, that balance was tested in front of millions. By the time viewers realized something was off, the interview had already crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. The question had been asked. The reaction had landed. And the rest of the conversation would unfold under the shadow of that moment. What exactly was said, how Mark Wahlberg reacted in real time, and why the tension became visible to everyone watching are details that deserve careful attention. Because the most telling live TV moments aren't loud. They are controlled, restrained, and impossible to edit away. And just ahead, the story turns to what led up to that question, and why the pressure had been building long before Wahlberg ever sat down on Jimmy Kimmel's couch. Long before Mark Wahlberg walked onto the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live, there was already a complicated backdrop shaping how that interview would unfold. Not a single headline or scandal dominating the news cycle, but years of public perception, past remarks, and an image built on intensity, discipline, and control. By the time this appearance happened, Wahlberg was no longer just another Hollywood guest rotating through late-night television. He was a figure audiences felt they understood, and expectations were firmly set. Mark Wahlberg's public persona has always been tightly managed. He is known as one of the most disciplined actors in Hollywood, famous for strict routines, early mornings, and an almost militant approach to work ethic. Interviews often reinforce this image. He speaks confidently, sometimes bluntly, rarely hesitating. There is an edge to his tone that can come across as passion or toughness, depending on the moment. Over the years, fans have admired it. Critics have questioned it. But it has remained consistent. At the same time, Wahlberg's past has never fully disappeared from public conversation. Early life controversies, later apologies, and ongoing discussions around accountability have followed him quietly in the background of his career. He has addressed these topics before, sometimes directly, sometimes briefly, often choosing to pivot back to the present. The strategy has largely worked. His career continued to grow. His brand expanded into film, television, fitness, and business. By the time he sat down with Jimmy Kimmel, Wahlberg was promoting new work and reinforcing his position as a veteran star. These late-night appearances were familiar territory. He had been on Kimmel's show multiple times. The relationship between host and guest appeared relaxed, even friendly. That history matters, because familiarity lowers defenses. It encourages more candid exchanges. It creates an environment where questions can land closer than expected. Jimmy Kimmel's interviewing style is a key part of this equation. Unlike more confrontational formats, Kimmel's approach is conversational. He often frames pointed questions with humor or casual phrasing, allowing guests to engage without feeling attacked. But that same style can also catch people off guard. When a question sounds casual but carries weight, reactions tend to be more honest. Leading up to this interview, Wahlberg had been increasingly vocal about discipline, respect, and personal responsibility. In various appearances, he emphasized structure, boundaries, and accountability. These themes resonated with many viewers, but they also sharpened scrutiny. When a public figure speaks often about control, moments where that control appears strained stand out more clearly. There was also the broader context of live television itself. Unlike pre-recorded interviews, live shows do not allow for recalibration. A guest cannot ask for a pause. A producer cannot cut away to soften a response. Whatever happens becomes part of the broadcast, preserved exactly as it unfolds. Experienced guests understand this, but experience does not eliminate vulnerability. It only masks it until the right moment exposes it. As the interview approached, nothing suggested it would deviate from the norm. No promotional material hinted at tension. No prior clips foreshadowed confrontation. The audience came prepared to laugh, applaud, and enjoy a familiar exchange between a seasoned actor and a well-known host. That sense of routine is what makes disruption so powerful. When viewers expect smoothness and receive friction instead, the contrast is impossible to ignore. Inside the studio, the early moments reinforced that expectation. Wahlberg appeared comfortable. He joked easily. His posture was relaxed. Kimmel guided the conversation through familiar territory, letting the audience settle into the rhythm of a typical late-night segment. But beneath that rhythm, pressure was quietly building. Live interviews are cumulative experiences. Each question slightly narrows the frame. Each answer reveals not just content, but tone. As the conversation progressed, Kimmel began steering away from surface-level promotion and toward broader reflections. Not aggressively, not abruptly, just enough to change the direction. This is often where things begin to go wrong, not because of bad intentions, but because of misalignment. A guest may believe they are still in safe territory, while the host believes the conversation has earned a deeper turn. That gap, even when small, can create friction. Mark Wahlberg's communication style tends to be direct and assertive. He answers quickly. He emphasizes certainty. When conversations challenge that certainty, even subtly, the response can shift. Not into anger, but into defense. And defensiveness does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as tightened phrasing, shorter answers, or a visible change in expression. The audience, though unaware of the specific question to come, could feel the interview tightening. Laughter became less spontaneous. Wahlberg leaned back slightly rather than forward. His answers grew more measured. These were not signs of conflict, but of preparation. The body often reacts before the mind catches up. What made the setup especially delicate was the trust between host and guest. Kimmel was not an outsider pressing for reaction. He was a familiar presence, someone Wahlberg had spoken with before. That familiarity likely made the question feel safer to ask, and perhaps more surprising to receive. As the conversation edged closer to the moment that would define the interview, there was still no visible warning. No raised voices. No sharp tonal shift. Everything appeared controlled. But live television has a way of compressing tension into seconds. When it releases, it does so quickly. By the time Jimmy Kimmel framed the question that would alter the tone of the interview, the conditions were already set. A disciplined celebrity known for control. A relaxed host skilled at asking disarming questions. A live audience. No edits. No second takes. All that remained was the moment itself. The shift happened in the middle of what still felt like a normal conversation. Jimmy Kimmel leaned slightly forward, maintaining the relaxed posture he uses when guiding interviews into more reflective territory. His tone didn't change. There was no dramatic pause before the question, no hint that this was meant to provoke. It arrived calmly, framed as a continuation of what they were already discussing. Mark Wahlberg listened, nodding once as the question landed. For a brief moment, his expression stayed neutral. Then something tightened. His jaw set. His smile, which had been easy and frequent earlier, didn't return. He inhaled, preparing to answer, and when he began speaking, the difference was immediate. His voice was firmer now, the pacing faster, as if he wanted to get ahead of the topic before it could settle. He leaned back slightly on the couch, shoulders squared, creating physical distance where moments earlier there had been ease. This wasn't an outburst. It wasn't raised voices or visible anger. It was defensiveness in its most controlled form. Live television captured everything. The audience reacted cautiously. There was no laughter to cushion the exchange, no applause to guide the rhythm. People sensed the tonal shift and instinctively pulled back. In late-night studios, audiences are conditioned to respond quickly, but here, they hesitated. The room grew quieter, attentive in a way that suggested uncertainty rather than discomfort. Jimmy Kimmel stayed measured. He didn't interrupt. He didn't challenge the response directly. He let Wahlberg finish, eyes focused, posture steady. That restraint allowed the moment to unfold fully, without escalation, but also without escape. As Wahlberg continued, his words became more deliberate. He emphasized clarity, intent, and personal responsibility. He corrected what he perceived as an implication in the question, not angrily, but assertively. His hands moved more than before, punctuating points, signaling control. This was not a man losing composure. This was a man protecting it. The tension lived in contrast. Earlier in the interview, Wahlberg had been animated, relaxed, even playful. Now, the energy was contained, guarded. Each sentence felt constructed not for humor, but for precision. On live TV, that contrast is impossible to miss. Kimmel responded carefully, offering brief acknowledgments rather than counterpoints. He allowed the answer to stand as delivered. The exchange lasted only a short time, but in the compressed reality of live broadcasting, it felt longer. Silence crept in between sentences, not as absence, but as weight. There were no edits to soften it. No cutaways to audience reactions. The camera stayed close, capturing facial expressions that told their own story. Wahlberg's eyes stayed focused, occasionally narrowing. Kimmel nodded, listening, recalibrating in real time. This was the core of the moment. Not a single line or quote, but but the visible shift from comfort to defense, broadcast without filters. It demonstrated how quickly live television can move from entertainment to exposure, even when everyone involved remains professional. As Wahlberg finished his response, there was a brief pause. Not silence, but a beat where the show seemed to decide how to move forward. The audience responded with light applause, respectful but restrained. It wasn't the roar that usually follows a confident statement. It was acknowledgement. Kimmel took that cue and gently redirected the conversation. His tone softened further, signaling transition rather than confrontation. He asked the next question in a way that created distance from the tension, allowing the show to regain momentum without pretending the moment hadn't happened. But something had already changed. Wahlberg remained composed, but the guardedness lingered. His subsequent answers were shorter, more focused on facts than feelings. The easy back and forth of earlier moments didn't fully return. Live television had done what it always does at its most revealing. It had shown the pivot point. For viewers at home, this was the kind of moment that cuts through distraction. Even if you weren't watching closely, you felt it. A tonal drop. A seriousness that doesn't belong to scripted banter. These are the moments people rewind, not because they are loud, but because they are honest. Nothing about the exchange violated decorum. No rules were broken. Yet it stood out because it exposed something rarely visible. The boundary where a celebrity stops performing and starts defending their position in real time. As the interview continued toward its conclusion, the immediate tension faded, but the impression remained. The question had landed. The reaction had been seen. And once something like that happens on live television, it can't be unseen. What followed, in the minutes after the cameras moved on and the studio lights dimmed, would determine how this moment was remembered, and why it became more than just another late-night appearance. Stay with Prime Talk. The interview moved forward, but it did not fully return to its original rhythm. The immediate aftermath of the exchange lingered in the studio, subtle but unmistakable. The air felt tighter, more deliberate, as if everyone involved had quietly agreed to tread more carefully. The audience adjusted first. Laughter still came when prompted, but it lacked the looseness of the opening minutes. Applause arrived a fraction later than usual, as if people were checking the tone of the room before responding. This wasn't discomfort turning into rejection. It was awareness. The crowd had recognized that something real had happened, and instinctively, they gave it space. Mark Wahlberg remained outwardly composed. He sat upright, shoulders squared, hands resting more still than before. His facial expression settled into a neutral focus, professional and controlled. If there was lingering emotion, it was managed carefully. This was not a spiral. It was containment. The kind that experienced public figures rely on when a conversation veers into unexpected territory. Jimmy Kimmel's handling of the moment became just as important as the moment itself. He did not attempt to reframe the exchange with humor or exaggeration. There was no self-aware joke to release the tension, no sarcastic aside to signal that everything was fine. Instead, he did something more difficult. He respected what had just occurred by not diminishing it. Kimmel's next questions were lighter, but not careless. He shifted topics without abruptness, choosing material that allowed the interview to continue without reopening the tension. His pacing slowed slightly, his tone softened. It was a subtle recalibration, visible only to those paying close attention, but crucial to maintaining balance on live television. The cameras stayed steady. No dramatic zooms. No reaction shots hunting for discomfort. The production allowed the exchange to settle naturally, trusting the audience to follow along. In doing so, the show avoided turning a moment of defensiveness into spectacle. Wahlberg responded to the remaining questions with precision. His answers were clear, efficient, and focused on the work he was there to promote. The warmth returned in flashes, brief smiles and nods, but the earlier ease never fully re-established itself. The interview had been divided into two distinct halves, and everyone in the room could feel it. What changed instantly for Wahlberg was not his reputation, but his posture within the conversation. He was no longer simply participating. He was managing. That shift is familiar to anyone who has felt the need to regain control after being momentarily challenged in public. It doesn't announce itself loudly, but it's unmistakable. As the segment neared its end, the closing moments carried a different tone than the opening. Kimmel thanked Wahlberg sincerely, without flourish. Wahlberg stood, shook hands, and acknowledged the audience with professionalism. The applause was strong, but measured. Appreciative, not euphoric. Once the cameras moved on to the next segment, the studio energy gradually loosened. Crew members reset. The band prepared. The machinery of late-night television continued, as it always does. But for those who had witnessed the exchange live, the impression remained. Outside the studio, the immediate reaction began quietly. There was no dramatic gasp rippling across social media in real time. No instant outrage. Instead, clips began to circulate slowly, often focusing on the tonal shift rather than a specific quote. Viewers shared short segments with captions that hinted rather than explained. Something felt off here. Watch closely. Comment sections reflected that same restraint. People debated whether Wahlberg was defensive or simply direct. Some praised his firmness. Others noted the visible change in energy. Many pointed out how quickly the mood shifted, and how rare it is to see that happen so clearly on a late-night show. Media coverage followed a similar pattern. Articles referenced the interview without sensational language. The focus was on the exchange itself, not on amplifying conflict. Writers noted the professionalism on both sides, while acknowledging that the moment stood out precisely because it broke from expectation. Notably, there was no immediate response from Wahlberg's team. No clarification. No statement. No attempt to contextualize the moment beyond what had already aired. That silence suggested that nothing needed correcting. The interview had spoken for itself. Jimmy Kimmel also did not revisit the moment in subsequent episodes. There was no monologue reference, no callback joke. In an environment where viral moments are often repurposed endlessly, this restraint signaled respect. The exchange had been allowed to exist as it was, without being inflated into something else. What the moment ultimately changed was subtle but lasting. It reminded viewers that even the most seasoned celebrities can be affected by a single question, especially when it arrives without warning on live television. It also reinforced the power of tone. Not what is said, but how it's received, and how it's carried afterward. The discomfort did not explode. It dissipated slowly, like a ripple fading across water. But ripples leave traces. They mark where something disturbed the surface. As the night went on and new segments filled the broadcast, the interview became part of the archive. But the clip lived on, detached from its original context, replayed and re-examined. And with each replay, viewers noticed the same thing. The shift. The defense. The moment where control tightened. To understand why that exchange continues to be referenced, and how it fits into the larger story of Mark Wahlberg's public image, it's necessary to look beyond the immediate reaction and examine the longer arc that followed. With distance, the live exchange between Mark Wahlberg and Jimmy Kimmel settled into a different category of memory. It wasn't remembered as a blow-up or a scandal, but as a moment that revealed how thin the line can be between comfort and defensiveness when cameras are rolling and the clock won't stop. The long-term impact wasn't about damage control. It was about perception, and perception in modern media rarely shifts all at once. It moves gradually, informed by small, unedited moments that feel authentic. For Wahlberg, the clip became a reference point rather than a defining mark. His career trajectory didn't stall. Projects continued. Box office numbers, production deals, and business ventures moved forward as planned. What changed was the way audiences talked about him in interviews. The conversation grew more nuanced. Viewers and commentators began to note not just his intensity, but how that intensity shows up under pressure. The exchange reinforced something many already suspected. Wahlberg's public persona is built on control. Discipline, certainty, and structure are core to how he presents himself. On screen, that translates into commanding performances. In business, it becomes brand consistency. On live television, however, that same discipline can read as rigidity when a question challenges the frame. Importantly, the moment didn't expose a contradiction so much as it clarified a pattern. Wahlberg has often spoken about responsibility and directness. The live interview showed how those values operate when they are tested without warning. Some viewers appreciated the firmness. Others interpreted it as defensiveness. Both readings existed side by side, and that coexistence is what gave the moment staying power. Media coverage over time reflected that balance. Retrospectives and commentary avoided sensational language, instead pointing to the exchange as an example of how live talk shows can still generate genuine moments. The analysis focused on tone, pacing, and body language rather than quotes taken out of context. In an era where viral clips are often flattened into outrage, this one resisted that treatment. Jimmy Kimmel's role continued to be viewed favorably in hindsight. The consensus wasn't that he pushed too hard, but that he asked a question that mattered and handled the response with restraint. His decision not to escalate, not to joke it away, and not to revisit it later contributed to the moment's credibility. It felt complete on its own, without needing commentary or explanation. Culturally, the exchange landed at a time when audiences were increasingly skeptical of overly polished celebrity appearances. Viewers have grown accustomed to rehearsed vulnerability and controlled authenticity. Live television disrupts that expectation. It introduces risk. And when risk appears, even briefly, it captures attention. This is why the moment continues to circulate. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest in a way that can't be manufactured. It showed how quickly an interview can pivot from promotion to defense, from ease to vigilance. It reminded viewers that celebrities are not immune to being surprised, even on familiar ground. The significance also lies in what didn't happen. There was no apology tour, no follow-up clarification, no attempt to rewrite the narrative. The absence of reaction allowed the clip to exist without amplification. That restraint kept the focus on the exchange itself rather than on surrounding noise. For audiences, the moment offered a lesson in reading between the lines. Live television isn't just about words. It's about timing, posture, and the split-second decisions people make when they realize they are being seen without filters. Those details are easy to miss, but once noticed, they are hard to forget. In discussions about talk show confrontations, this exchange occupies a middle ground. It wasn't explosive enough to dominate headlines, but it was significant enough to endure. It demonstrated that exposure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from a single question landing differently than expected. Years from now, viewers may not remember the specific project Wahlberg was promoting that night. They may not recall the jokes or the opening banter. What remains is the moment when the tone shifted, when a seasoned celebrity recalibrated in real time, and when live television did what it does best at its most revealing. That's why this moment still matters today. It underscores the value of live broadcasting in a media environment saturated with control. It shows how quickly narratives can bend, not because of controversy, but because of authenticity under pressure. At Prime Talk, these are the moments we pay attention to. The ones that don't shout, but resonate. The exchanges that reveal more through reaction than through dialogue. If you value serious, unedited storytelling that examines live television moments that quietly changed perception, subscribe to Prime Talk. Hit like, share this video, and tell us in the comments how you read that moment on live TV.